My name is Phil Kearney. I create role-playing games, I illustrate them, and I publish them online. And it is Kraken Week, where we're celebrating all nautical-themed adventures. I'm setting sail for Spelljammer Adventures in Space for 5th edition by creating Star Kraken, the Mega-Kaiju. This is a 1,500-foot cosmic horror attacking the Rock of Bral. We're going to build the scenario. Your characters can deal with this. We're going to show you how. So come aboard and let's go. Okay, we're going to break this down into 3 sections. The Rock of Bral and its defenses, the Mega-Kaiju, and the challenge. Now, all the mechanics and rules that we're using to create this encounter are detailed in Spelljammer Combat and Exploration. This is a supplement that I published on DMsGuild recently. And in the description down below, we'll have both a link to the book, a link for a discount if you wanted to pick it up. And if you like how this encounter goes, there's going to be a page listing of all the different mechanics that were implemented to make this encounter happen. So we're going to start with the Rock of Bral. This is a poster map that's included when you purchase Spelljammer Adventures in Space from Wizards of the Coast. It's really great. They've provided a distance bar here. It says 200, 400, 600, 800, 1,000 feet. So this length here is 1,000 feet, which means each one of these squares is a 500-foot square. So we're going to break down the composition of the rock itself. Now, scale is a really important thing in this book. If you check it out, you'll see down here in the combat chapter that we're working in scale. There's 3 different scales that we're typically working in: the 5-foot scale, the 50-foot scale, and the 500-foot scale, which you can see here. At the 500-foot scale, a 10 by 10 space, for instance, in Light of Xeraxis. This is a map that we created that's included with the supplements, and we have a full conversion guide for using these mechanics to run Light of Xeraxis. But you can see here that this is a 10 by 10 space at the 500-foot scale. So this is a 1-mile area that this Imperial Citadel is occupying. And you can see a fleet of star moths that are defending it versus attack. Each of these squadrons of ships are occupying a 500-foot square and against this enemy fleet of hammerhead ships. If you zoom in to where ships are encountering each other, we can then zoom into the 50-foot scale. This is a 10 by 10 space at the 50-foot scale, depicting multiple ships that form a single squadron acting together. But when you get this close to each other, they stop acting as just an individual unit of squadrons. You can actually engage each ship directly in combat as pilots. And here we're seeing that one of these elven warbirds has landed on the back of this hammerhead ship, which allows us to then shift our scale down to the 5-foot scale, where Marines are disembarking from the warbird to take over this hammerhead ship. So when we're working in this document, we are looking at the 5-foot, 50-foot, and 500-foot scale, often simultaneously on separate maps, which we break down how to do in the book. At this scale, at the 500-foot scale, the Rock of Bral is primarily rock. So if we're working on our scaling mechanics here, dropping down to where we're looking at objects, in the exploration chapter, we can see object size and hit points. A 5-foot area of stone, according to the Dungeon Master's Guide, has 30 hit points per inch of thickness, which is approximately 2,000 hit points per 5-foot cube of full matter. So you can see here at the 5-foot scale, it's 2,000. If it was something light, like bamboo, like a large block of bamboo, or like carve out a chunk out of Yggdrasil, the world tree, that might be light wood material, or it could be dense wood material, which could be a composite material. Composite could also be a mix of like light wood reinforced with metal. So you have these 3 different degrees of density that matter has, which converts into hit points. Now, D&D is not Euclidean. In D&D, circles are squares. And that also means that we don't exponentially increase things as they scale up. Instead, we just have a geometric smooth growth. It makes it very easy for us to be able to process. So at the 5-foot scale, a solid block of stone has 2,000 hit points. At the 50-foot scale, it's 20,000 hit points. And at the 500-foot scale, it's 200,000 hit points. But a kaiju is not going to be really interested in eating just blocks of stone. They're probably going to be a lot more interested on the underside of Rock of Bral, which is covered in fields and forest and just delicious, easily grazable food. Nom, 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 nom. If for some reason it weren't able to get to this, perhaps it would go back to the top side and then start chewing on buildings to eat people. But ideally, it's going to want to target the underside first. This field isn't, here's the active area. You can see here at the 500-foot scale, it's a 5 by 7 foot area, so 35 squares that the kaiju is going to be interested in basically grazing on while the Rock of Bral is trying to shoo it away by shooting it enough that it goes away. So using the same mechanics here at the 500-foot scale, we are considering this to be a hollow substance. Hollow is typically reserved for ships. Like if you have a 200-foot long vessel like a Star Moth, for instance, or a 250-foot long ship like a hammerhead ship or a squid ship, most of that ship is a couple inches of wood or metal, perhaps, and then the vast majority of it's empty space so you can move around inside of it. That means roughly that you only have about maybe 1% of the actual space that object occupies as actual object. The rest of it's just open space. That's why we call it hollow. In the instance of these fields, this is like, say these are corn or wheat fields, which grow about 5-6 feet tall, which is about 1% of what the light wood area, like a 500-foot tall tree that's 500 feet wide trunk, that would have 100,000 hit points. But since we're only talking about 1% of that being 5-foot tall corn stalks, a 500-foot area of field using these mechanics has 1,000 hit points, right? So each square has 1,000 hit points. And what we want to do is to chase the kaiju away before it's able to eat all 35 squares, destroying the veins in the fortress, probably in the process, while it's grazing. We want to get rid of it as fast as possible, because if it eats all of the vegetation off the underside of the asteroid, there's not going to be any air available for the top side of the asteroid, and people are going to have to either evacuate, or you're going to have to find a really powerful circle conclave of druids and rangers to help you rebuild all of this vegetation within the next 100 days. Otherwise, the whole area is going to become poisonous. Now, there's not a lot of information that's provided in the Spelljammer's Adventures in Space box set from Wizards of the Coast that was published in August 2022. But back in the 90s, there was a whole box set for the Rock of Bral itself. And it provided some great information. It's still out there, and you can grab it if you're really interested. But basically, there's basically two types of defenses. There are the defense towers and the naval fleet. So let's look at each of these in kind. So first off, we have the Bral Heavy Ballista Tower. There are a slew of them. Let's zoom into Prince Ardu's palace. You can see this is a ballista tower. And this is another ballista tower. There's a whole bunch of them. They're all over the place. Up top, around the periphery here, there's approximately 14 of them. And they're described as massive siege machines that require 14 people to fire once per round, and that has a 3,000-foot range. So if we're looking at our supplement, that actually aligns with the GIF giant cannon. It also has a crew of 14, has a 3,000-foot range in void space. It does 2d8 times 10 bludgeoning damage. If we're using ballista, then it would be piercing damage instead of bludgeoning damage. But essentially, it's the same. Now, the interesting thing about the GIF giant cannon is that it's literally built into their ship. So it's not on any kind of a rotator at all. You have to actually, the pilot has to turn the ship and then issue the command to fire once the ship has been turned. But the way that's been described in the Rock of Bral supplement is that these ballista are on gear shift dioces that allow them to rotate, so they can be really, really big and be able to point in any direction, including straight up. So that functions just fine. But there's 14 of them, and it does 2d8 damage each. So that would be 28d8 damage, which would cap out with a max of around 2,200 some odd hit points. But we like to simplify math around here. So instead, just roll a d20 times 100 damage. If you roll really poorly, then just most of them missed. If you do really well, then you've got a really good hit. There'll be a single attack roll, and that's the amount of damage that you're going to do. The problem is that they are located on the top of the asteroid, and once something enters the space occupied by your vessel or rock or whatever, you can use the object itself as cover to prevent, like, you can't shoot somebody with a ballista if they're below deck or on the other side of the deck. If they're outside of your space, yeah, you can hit them. But once they get inside an occupied space with you, like grappling, like grappling rules, or like riding a mount, for instance, it's the same kind of idea. So the underside has weapons as well. Here we're looking at, these are gift giant cannon towers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 gift cannons in here, and exactly, it's just a gift cannon. There you go. We already know the statistics for it. It's bludgeoning damage instead of piercing. 10 giant cannons is 2d8 times 10 times 10. So that would be very easy as a single solid volley. It would do 2d8 times 100 damage once per round. Next, let's look at the fleets. So the Bral Navy fleets. Again, the supplement from 2E provides you the breakdown of the NPCs that are the crew, commanders, as well as like the actual ships themselves. So it's not called a tradesman. Now it's called a flying fish. So there's 6 hammerhead ships. There's 8 squid ships. There's 3 lamprey and 3 flying fish. Let's go up and take a look at those guys here real quick. We can see here, here is the hammerhead ship. It's 250 feet long. It occupies a 5x5 space at the 50-foot scale. This is a squid ship. It's also 250 feet long, occupies a 5x5 space at the 50-foot scale. Over here, we've got the flying fish, which is a 3x3, and the lamprey, which is also a 3x3. All these guys are just bristling with various, not only ranged, but also melee weapons that they can engage ships in close quarter combat, dog fighting with each other, and attacking giant creatures. So the way that squadrons work is you can have up to 10 squares of ships in a single squadron. So this, like for instance, these hammerhead ships, this is a 5x5 space that counts as 5 squares towards your squadron. So 2 hammerhead ships would be a 10 square space. Even though you could potentially fit more of these inside of a 500-foot square, if you fly in tight formation, you can have a bunch of them grouped together, but they're still going to be treated as individual squadrons. So when we're looking at the statistics, we can see that is hammerhead ships. There's 3 squadrons, 2 each. There's 8 squids, 4 squadrons, 2 each. They have 100 hit points per 50 feet. That's just like a star moth, for instance, has 400 hit points. It's 200 feet long. So each 50 feet square of space that a ship occupies, again, it's geometric, not Euclidean. So a 5x5 vessel would occupy 5 squares times 200 hit points. 5x5, 100 hit points, it'd be 500 hit points. 2 of them together, that's 1,000 hit points. So we've got 9 squadrons here. The lampreys, there's 3 lampreys. They have 900 hit points. There's 3 flying fish. As a squadron, they have 900 hit points. But honestly, an extra 100 hit points doesn't matter. If you want to make it easy on yourself, you can just call them 10 squares. But if you need to be specific, it's 9. So the amount of damage that they deal is equal to the number of squares they occupy times the weapon that they're using times 10 siege damage. And if we're just assuming, there's trebuchets that do D8, there's ballistas that do D4, and then there's catapults that do D6. So when we're looking at ships that have multiple types of weapons on them, it's easier just to assume it's a d6. It just kind of rounds off to a d6. So it would be 10d6 times 10, or 1d6 times 100 per fleet, per squadron. There's 9 squadrons in the fleet. So that's roughly, if the entire fleet were to attack together, it would be 9d6 times 100, roughly once per round, if the NPCs are coordinating all the movements and you're just issuing commands. So how can the players implement these mechanics? Well, we can have one character can fire all the barrage of ballistas. One character, or one player, the ballistas, another player, the cannons. If we have 5 people at the table, that's one person, that's a second person, and then the rest of the players at the table can command 3 squadrons of ships each, doing 3d6 times 100 damage whenever they hit once per round. So that if you had 5 people at the table, great. If you only have 4 people at the table, you could have one person do both of the tower defenses, and then the other 3 people could have 3 squadrons each. Now, we have an issue here, because how much time are we going to have before this kaiju arrives and starts tearing up the place? So, because once something occupies space with you, the object creates cover. Like these ballista towers on top of the asteroid can't shoot things on the bottom side of the asteroid, and vice versa. So once the kaiju gets inside of the space of the Rock of Bral, you're going to lose half of your defense towers. So you want to use both of them before the kaiju gets there. So how much advanced notice are we actually going to have? Let's go check this out. First off, the kaiju. It's a 1,500-foot kaiju. It occupies a 3x3 space. So let's go look at our visibility here. Go to our document, zoom out. Let's go down to the exploration chapter and take a look at encountering objects with visibility. It's bigger than 500 feet, so it's going to fit inside the 1 mile scale. An orrery station, it can detect things. An orrery station is a scrying device. If you are concentrating on this device, not only will you be able to see all the planetary objects in your system, but you can also see smaller craft. Virtually anything that's 5 feet or larger in scale, you could potentially see in Wildspace. If the object, let's go back. So a 1 mile object on an orrery station, if you are scrying through space looking for targets, 1 million miles with a DC 19. Roll a die, the DM rolls a die, and it's going to be basically disadvantage on the roll. If both of the rolls are above 19, you can see it further than 1 million miles away. If the roll is less than 19, you won't see it until it's 1 million miles away. That sounds like it's really far away, but it's really not. These kaiju can travel just as fast as ships can. That means 100 million miles per day, 24 hours. So if we're using scale again, that 24 hours, basic, roughly a tenth of that is 2 hours. We're just going to approximate it. So approximately 1/10 of a day is 2 hours, which is 10 million miles. Approximately 10% of 120 minutes is 10 minutes. So that's 1 million miles, which basically means you have 10 minutes to get ready for this kaiju to arrive. If your lookouts roll really well, and at disadvantage they roll above a 19, you'll see it more than 1 million miles away. So you'll probably have something like an hour of time before the kaiju is going to get there. That's tons of time. But even 10 minutes is enough to get everyone aboard ships, get your ballista weapons and your cannons all loaded up, and ready actions for when they're within 1 mile. Siege weapons can't hit things more than a mile away. They're not lasers. They take time to get there. And if it takes too long to get there, you can just get out of the way. You literally saw it coming from a mile away. So you generally want to wait until they're within 1 mile of you for you to be able to start opening fire. You'll be at disadvantage until you get within 3,000 feet. And then you'll be attacking like normal. but you'll only have, if this thing can move 10,000 miles in one round, and you can't fire on it until it's only 1 mile away, basically you need to be you have to have your finger on the trigger and fire as soon as it's close enough for you to do so, like right before it gets there. You'll have a chance to hit it with both barrages on either side of the asteroid before it decides where it's going to actually enter the space of the rock and land. And chances are it's going to want to nom nom and all the fresh veggies down here. Look how huge this thing is compared to the rock. This is really bad news. So what exactly can this kaiju do? So what can the kaiju actually do to this? Well, the kaiju itself is a 3x3 space at the 50-foot scale, right? So that means it, let's go look at our object size and capacity, because this applies to mega-sized fauna, mega-sized creatures and kaiju. So it is at the 500-foot scale. And it isn't a light material, it's a living creature, but it's not like a squishy mammal like with all its outsides. It has a shell and chitin, plus it's huge. It's hundreds of feet long. Its body is hundreds of feet thick. We consider that to be a hybrid, where it's somewhere between the density and mass of like a light composite material, but it's not as dense as that, but it's more dense than a squishy, like a giant would be, like a squishy giant or whatever. So it's like a giant crustacean cuttlefish sort of thing. It's a kraken. There you go. So it uses the hybrid. At the 500-foot scale, it's a 3x3 creature, just like we were looking at with ships. This 3x3 space that it occupies means you multiply the damage by 3. So this thing has 30,000 hit points. That's huge. But again, the amount of damage that we're dealing with our weapons, it's like 1,000 points, like an average roll of these cannons. Like this is 1,000 points. This is roughly like 800 points that this is going to deal. Each of these is going to deal around 300 times 9, like around 27 points. So you could potentially, once it picks a side, it's basically going to be doing by itself, it's going to be doing, your team with the defenses can do about 4,000 points of damage per round against any incoming invaders, targets, kaijus, enemy fleets. That's really intimidating, considering that these fleets themselves only have 1,000 hit points each. Like the Rocket Brawl can knock out 3 squadrons per round. So you need to come packing. The kaiju, though, with 30,000 hit points, if you're going to do an average of about 4,000 damage per round with all of these ships, then you can't, it's going to take what? 4, 3, 30. It's probably going to take 7 or 8 rounds for you to be able to kill this kaiju. You might get a freebie round while it's closing distance, but you're going to have to expect that actual combat is going to be occurring on the Rock of Bral in real time while it's starting to tear up your terrain. So let's look at what this thing can do. So the combat, okay, so it's got magic resistance, which is advantage on saving throws. Basically, it's got the normal statistics of a cosmic horror, which is a very high CR creature, which doesn't matter because you're not stabbing it with a sword and I only got 5 hit points, I'm dead. No, you're dealing with fleets of ships that do thousands of damage. So as long as you're on a fleet, you can deal with this. So magic resistance has advantage. It has all the stuff that the cosmic horror would have, but it also has something called a ward. So when the Star Kraken is targeted or in the area of effect of a spell, the caster must spend an additional 3rd level spell slot to amplify the magic to be significant enough to impact something that's at the 500-foot scale. It's you can affect a ship that's like 50 feet in size with 1 level of amplified. You can affect a ship that's up to 500 feet in size with 2 spell slots, either by upcasting or just spending like 2 first level spell slots or or like a single 2nd level spell slot. But this thing is so huge it requires 3 spell slots to do. So like if I wanted to throw I don't know, fireball at it, it would be a huge blast and you would damage it, but the damage would be insignificant. because the fireball isn't going to ramp up damage. It just doesn't work that way. So you'd have to pick out, like you would mostly only be able to use debuff spells against it, like slow or confusion, or maybe like a maze or phantasmal killer. These are things that you can potentially affect it with. Granted, it'll have advantage against that, but if you want to target it with that sort of stuff, you're going to have to get past this magic resistance, and then you're going to have to dump in an extra 3 spell levels just to try. So that's a very brutal cost. So chances are you're going to have to lean, unless you're high-level characters, you're going to have to lean into your fleets dealing with this. Rock of Bral might have 2 or 4 different characters on there that would be able to do enough firepower to affect this thing on a personal level. Chances are we're going to be dealing with fleets. So its defenses are huge. Combat. What's its primary action during this encounter is grazing. While grazing, the Star Kraken deals 1,000 hit points of damage in the center of its space per round. If we zoom in here, we can see this thing has a mouth. But it occupies a 3x3 space. So whatever space it's currently on, like the 3x3 space, this center square gets eaten. And then this one gets eaten. And this one gets eaten. And then this one gets eaten. And it can eat those 5 squares and then move on to the next. It can't be attacking while it's grazing. If it's grazing and eating, it can't attack you. It doesn't do. That's just one of the rules of how it works. It's concentrating on eating. It can't really, unless you're occupying its space, it can like swat at you like with flies and stuff, which is really dangerous. If you're outside of its space, it can make an attack with you, and it'll have anywhere from 1d4 tentacles that will lash out at targets outside of its space. It has a 1,500 foot reach because that's how melee combat works in D&D. Basically, whatever size space you occupy is the reach that you have as well. And so up to 1,500 feet away, it can swat at stuff. But again, its primary concern is grazing. So if it's grazing, it's not attacking you. But if you're outside of its, but again, it can take so much damage, you can't kill it for basically 7 rounds unless you get lucky. Here's the thing. Because it can move 10,000 miles in a round if it's in full flight, while it's on the surface of the Rock of Bral, generally things move, like a movement speed is basically 5 squares at whatever scale of speed that you need. In this circumstance, it could be like a 5-foot crawl, which would be ridiculous for a 1,500 foot creature. It could, even 50-foot spaces of movement would be ridiculous. The size of the creature is 500 feet. That becomes the native scale of movement. So it's 5 squares at the 500-foot scale. And while it's grazing, it can eat 1 square for every square that it moves. It has to use the grazing action to do this, so you can't move and dash. It has to move and graze. So it can do up to 5 squares. Coincidentally, it has 7 rounds to eat all 35 squares worth of food. So you're basically racing it. The faster you can get it out of here, the more your crops are going to remain. If you start doing enough damage to it, it's going to start swatting at your troops, at your fleets, at weapons. You can distract it with firepower. So instead of grazing, it counterattacks and tries to take you out, right? So going back to our table here, here's an issue. A creature of this magnitude, it's over 500 feet, so up to the 1 mile scale, it's basically doing it. We know it does. It's in general things do d6. If it's depending on, there's a few rules about scale. Depending on how many squares of space it occupies, depends on what kind of die roll you're going to use. A 3x3 and a 4x4 uses a d6. A 1x1 or a 2x2 uses a d4. D4, d6, d8, d10, and then a 10x10 space would use a d12 times whatever your multiplier is. So a 3x3 kaiju, there you are. A 3x3 kaiju is 3 squares, so it's going to use a d6 times 1,000 damage. That is ridiculously large damage, but it's a ridiculously large creature. Here's an interesting thing. If you're free falling from space and you hit the ground, the maximum amount of damage that a 5-foot scale creature like a human can take in D&D is 20d6 damage for 200 feet of falling damage. It's basically d6 for every 10 feet that they fall, which translates into 5d6 worth of damage for every 50 feet that you fall. If you see where you're going, you're gonna love it. So a creature, like if a kaiju whips out and hits you, if you're using the fly spell and you're like lobbing magic missiles at it or whatever, and it decides to swat at you, then it's not going to be making an attack roll and dealing 1,000 times damage. It's going to be hitting you as though you just free fell whatever distance it is that it needs to reach you. If you're occupying space with it, it's 500 feet. 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet. That 2,000 feet basically breaks down to 20d6 damage. At this scale, it would be 20, like the kaiju, if it fell to the planet, I mean, it can fly, so it wouldn't fall, but if that was taken away from it and it free fell, it would take 20d6 times 1,000 damage, which could be anywhere from 20 to 120,000 damage that this quote unquote little critter would take. If it free fell from orbit and hit the ground, it would die. It's most likely, unless it's a miracle and rolls a shitload of ones, it's gonna end up dead because it's gonna exceed the 30,000 hit point capacity that it has. But sadly, it landed here and it's starting to squash stuff. Your ships are up to 50 feet in size. So are fighter craft, like little fighter craft. They're only 50 feet, up to 50 feet in size. So they just take normal damage. A vessel like that Hammerhead ship, for instance, it's larger than 50, smaller than 500. So it's going to take up to 2,000 feet away. It's going to take 5d6 times 10 damage for every 500 feet that it gets hit. So it would basically be if you're this far away, it would be 20d6 times 10 damage, which would be 1,200 damage potential of falling damage. If you're piloting a ship, you can make a dexterity saving throw and reduce that damage by half. If you're a rogue pilot, you could use evasion and potentially make it nothing. When it thwaps at you with a tentacle, you could potentially land your ship on its tentacle and take no damage. This is why it's so hard to hit a fly while it's in the air around you. It's almost impossible to hit a fly because flies are rogues and they have evasion and a crazy high dexterity. Compare that to a moth. A moth is a clumsy commoner. You can swat a moth, like a moth is never going to evade you. You can just snatch them out of the sky. They do not have evasion. So they're always taking full damage because they're always failing their saving throw and just getting obliterated. Like a moth is like half an inch in size. Half an inch converts to 6 inches, which converts to roughly 60 inches or 5 feet in size. So a human at 5 feet is literally a 500-foot scale creature compared to a moth that lands on your arm. You're dead. Because you just took falling damage, 20d6 falling damage. Because in the 500-foot scale, your character is basically falling 500 feet when you get slapped for landing on it. You're a nuisance. If you've got a good saving throw, you can roll out of it. I recommend that you approach the kaiju in fighter craft that are small enough to be smaller than 50 feet in size, like you could use a skiff. It's only a 20-foot ship. It's considered to be at the 50-foot or smaller scale. So it can dodge and take minimal damage like that with you. And while you're piloting it, you can make a saving throw. And if you have a rogue that's piloting, you can use evasion. That is going to allow your ship to potentially land on the kaiju. All right, so how does this challenge actually work? We know that each player at the table has a once per round sort of like passive action that they're taking in portraying the defense of the Rock of Bral. Whether you as a player are at the end of the round firing the heavy ballistas or the cannon towers, or you're commanding squadrons in a fleet, you're harassing the 30,000 hit point, 1,500 foot massive Mega-Kaiju, right? So, and we know that if it's using the graze action, it's going to be able to basically, it can move 5 squares, and as long as it's not taking any other action, it can graze and mange 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It can graze and mange on one row at a time. I mean, maybe it's, and then it'll move to the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's round 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's round 3. You've got 7 rounds before this kaiju can graze the entire air and food supply of the Rock of Bral. You know that it's going to take probably 7 or 8 rounds for the defenses of Rock of Bral to deal enough damage to the kaiju that it's going to want to run away. That's really rough because you succeeding means you fail. This is set up to automatically fail. So this is where the characters come in. So far, we're just talking about stuff as players. Players are rolling dice representing the Rock of Bral. But now the characters get to be the heroes, right? Because that's what we want to do. We want to be heroes. So we have our characters. And we know that if you're on a fighter craft, if everyone loads onto one of these little skiffs, you can, a party of what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, potentially 7 or 8, maybe 9. You could have an easy, just a normal party could jump on one of these skiffs, and they're small and maneuverable enough. If you have somebody with evasion or really good dexterity saving throws, is going to be able to weave and dodge and get through any, if the creature has taken enough damage, maybe like after eating half of the crops and it's here, and it's taken like maybe 10,000 points of damage, at that point it's going to start swatting at stuff. And it's going to start creating a threat. But what's your team going to do? Your team that plays all these amazing video games, what are they going to do? They're going to say, this thing is impossibly large. Does it have a weakness? It's a kaiju, of course it has a weakness. So here's the weakness. It has eyes. Okay, so let's look at weaknesses. There's a bonus action, the Thundering Bellow. It has a recharge die of a 5 of 6. Here's how it gets nasty. All within 500 feet. When it bellows, anyone that's within 500 feet of it is going to be at disadvantage on every d20 roll that they make. Saves, ability checks, and attack rolls for 1 minute. And at the end of your turn, you can make a wisdom saving throw of DC 19, of course, with disadvantage, to end the effect. And then it recharges on a 5 or a 6. It could do this on top of grazing. So this bellow, Thundering Bellow, does a good job of debuffing enemy ships to have them deal less damage or be easier to swat. But let's see, spelljamming speed. Oh yeah, it can teleport. Once you deal enough damage to it, it can teleport. And it can also plane shift at will, as I should write in there, as a bonus action. There you go. So it can teleport up to 100 miles away, or it can just flat out plane shift away. It also has true sight up to 10,000 miles away, which it can use as an orrery. And it has Wildspace senses. It is naturally telepathic, and it can sense things at the same scale as the orrery scanning checks that the scryers would use to detect stuff. It can do that too. And we already have up above there that the spellcaster has to spend extra spell slots. So let's get out of there. Here's its vulnerability. Go for the eyes. You can see here it has 4 eyes. Each are 50 feet in size. So you're looking at this 50-foot square here. And this eye is roughly a 1/10 of the square. So these eyes are 50 feet in size, right? Now, an interesting rule about these mechanics is that if you're 50 feet or smaller in size and you have cover, you can't be attacked with, you can't target that thing with siege weapons. This keeps people safe on the deck of their ship, for instance. Like if we go back down here and we're looking at this, like all these crew, any of these dudes could easily be wiped out by a ballista if they get shot with it. But look at this. They're hugging the rail. These guys are hugging the frame of the ship. These guys are using their wings as cover. And siege weapons themselves provide cover. So whenever you have cover, you cannot be targeted with a siege weapon. If you don't have any cover, you can. So somebody floating through space on their own, they're literally a sitting duck. That's why you have anti-personnel weapons, harpoon flingers. from Descent into Avernus, the Infernal War Machines. All of these ships are equipped with harpoon flingers because those are anti-personnel weapons. They do 2d8 piercing damage, which is good enough to kill a commoner with 10 hit points, or even like a generic soldier with 16 you can kill. So you can one-shot people with these harpoon flingers. A skiff typically has a harpoon flinger and a ballista on it. So if your team jumps onto a skiff, put your rogue, or whoever has evasion, into the pilot seat so you can survive those tentacle slashes. You can then close distance, and keep in mind, you're going to get swatted as though you were a pesky little gnat. But you can't target the eyes with the ballistas, so instead, you want to go in, and if you get close enough, you can land on its face. And if you actually land the ship like directly next to it, chunk, chunk, you can punch a ballista into its eye. Each eye has that's wrong. It should be, that's a typo. 100 hit points. And it has a damage threshold of 10 and an armor class of 20. So if you hit, you have to deal at least 10 damage, and it can take 100. If you deal at least 10 damage, just like in Descent into Avernus Infernal War Machines, if you do 10 or more damage, you deal full damage. We do have damage reduction in here, but the eye is too squishy for damage reduction. So it has a damage threshold. As soon as you deal 100 points of damage, it loses its eye. And when it loses 3 or more eyes, the Star Kraken is going to plane shift away to the Astral Sea. And then once it takes a long rest, it can regenerate its eye. And it has to reconsider whether it wants to come back to the Rock of Bral to graze again. This is all going to depend on how quickly can your team ascertain that there is that it has a weakness. If you want to lead, if the team doesn't automatically, because everyone's just automatically going to ask, does it have any weaknesses? Of course they are. It's like, yeah, it looks like it's shielding its eyes from incoming siege weapons. You're going to have to be in the same space as it for you to be able to get at its eyes. And then once you actually get in its space, it's like it's got all these ridges around it. You're going to have to literally get up on that eye. Just like in How to Train Your Dragon, number 2, when they land on that mega dragon and they start batting it in the eye with a hammer. That's awesome. So if you can deal 100 points of damage to an eye, the eye is blinded. If you can blind 3 eyes, it's going to panic and it's going to teleport away to the Astral Sea to heal. Okay, hey, that's Star Kraken, the Mega-Kaiju. You know, everything that you would need to build a similar sort of scenario for both Wildspace, Spelljammer's Adventures in Space, or just in your own nautical themed campaign in a standard ocean. All the mechanics to do this are in the supplement that I publish on DMsGuild called Spelljammer Combat and Exploration. There is a link to it in the description down below, along with a page reference for all the rules that we were implementing for this challenge. Check it out. I'm here every week creating new content, illustrations, and building stuff to place online for 5th edition and other game systems. So like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, do all the things, and check out all the other content that's coming out for Kraken Week. Thanks a lot.